Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is an exciting one. I am doing my year wrap up for 2024. I have already filmed this once and it was over an hour long and I still had many books to go, so I've decided to approach this differently. I'm going to share some of the stats from my StoryGraph, and then what I will do is highlight some honourable mentions that were 5-star reads that I just want to give a little shout out to. And then at the end of this video, I will share my top 5 reads from this year. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So in 2024, I read a total of 101 books, which is a lot. I've never actually achieved, since I started tracking probably like a decade now of my reading, I've never hit 100 books. Last year was the biggest reading year I'd had with 80 books, and a lot of those were children's books, to be quite honest. But this year I've hit 101. My goal was 100, and so I'm just like really chuffed of the fact that I was able to do that. However, I will say that this year reading has been basically my job, so also not something that I necessarily think is super, like, this is the only time I've ever achieved this in my life, so it's not something that I think that I can maintain in the future. And I'll talk about my reading goals for 2025 at the end of this video as well. But overall, I'm so glad that I was able to hit that mark for myself this year. And yeah, it was really interesting as well, because it says that, like, StoryGraph gives you a mood map of the books that you read throughout the month, and essentially January to August I was reading really, really dark emotional books, and then from August to December I was reading a lot lighter, more hopeful type books. Especially December was the month that I have light books at the very, like, it's the highest in December, which is interesting. In terms of books per month, my highest reading month regarding books was February. I read 16 books in February, whereas page-wise, my top reading month was April, when I read 3,045 words. And, you know, it kind of dipped in the summer, and I feel like it's starting to come back up. But yeah, that's the kind of highlights there. The genres that I spent, I never shared the amount of total pages, did I? I read quite a lot of short books, so I wouldn't be surprised if this seems low to some folk, but it was 101 books across 21,592 pages, which I'm still very impressed by. And then the genres you spent the most time with in 2024, philosophy is at the top with 24 books, and this makes sense because philosophy was my main focus in terms of just like getting a lot of background knowledge for that in relation to my thesis, which I am happy that I have done. And then the second category or second genre was fantasy, with a value of 23 books. However, 12 of those are from a manga series titled The Girl from the Other Side, so that's slightly skewed. I think it would be a lot more even than to the other genres listed here, which include mystery, poetry, and feminism. Those are my top 5. The longest book that I read this year is The Way, An Ecological Worldview by Edward Goldsmith. It's 570 pages, and it did not need to be 570 pages, but there we are. The shortest book was very teeny at just 48 pages, titled A Shining by John Fosse, and I did not like this book. I think that was a problem with it when it's too short. There was like, I didn't get it. I didn't understand what the purpose of the book was. But it was also only 48 pages, so I didn't DNF it because it was so short. So the book that I spent the most time with, I think this is a really interesting stat, is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And if you will have listened to me speak in some of my other videos, I mentioned how I felt like it was taking me a long time to get through it, and clearly that has been the case. But I took my time with it. It was for thesis reading. It is a really great book, but I do think that it dragged on longer than it needed to. And I still think it would have made more sense to have it in like some thematics as just one separate book entirely, but I did enjoy it nevertheless. My 2024 average rating was 3.5 stars, which is quite good, quite an average balanced rating, I would say. But at the same time, surprisingly, I rated 24 books 5 stars, which I didn't think I gave out many 5 stars, but clearly that's like a quarter of the books I've read. However, a lot of the Girl from the Other Side books I did rate 5 stars, so that might also have skewed it there. Another little interesting stat that they have here is saying that some months were better than others. July, I had the highest average rating for my book, so it was like my best reading month, with 4.5 stars. Fantastic. Whereas turns out October wasn't your favorite month with an average of 2.5 stars. That was also the month where I read the lowest amount of books. I only read 4 books in October. And the most popular book that I read this year in relation to how many other people have also read that book is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I'm so glad that I finally got to that book this year, and I know that it's very popular, and it's very popular for a reason, because it is fantastic. And then what else here? You explored the works of 73 new authors. That's really cool. I love knowing that. I love knowing that I've engaged with new authors, and 33 of the books you read were part of series. Again, I do think that this is skewed because I did finish an entire long manga series during this year, but nevertheless. You revisited a total of 3 books this year, which, what were those? It was Mary Beard's Women in Power, The Second Body by Daisy Hillard. Oh, and it will have been the Series of Unfortunate Events one as well. But then that would have been more. Anyways, I've done a few rereads this year, essentially. And that's pretty much it in terms of the stats. So I'm going to go ahead and close my laptop and I will show you some honorable mentions. I'm not going to talk much about them because I do still have quite a lot of books here and I'd like to keep this short. And then I will show my 5 top reads for 2024 as well. Okay, so we're going to move on to honorable mentions for these books. Now, I will admit that I have filmed this already in its entirety and felt very happy with it and was thrilled with how much I was able to verbalize and get my thoughts across regarding these books. However, I stopped and went to stop the video and my phone had died. So I've lost all of this section before it died, and that's very frustrating, but we persist, although I might not be as eloquent as I have been previously because I am now very tired. But in terms of the highlights, these are 5-star reads that I figured deserved some of the limelight on them because they have been brilliant, but they just missed out on being in my top 5 reads for 2024. So the first is Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is a canon fictional novel in relation to climate fiction narratives. It is absolutely brilliant. We follow our main character who can feel and experience other people's emotions, and this is in a time where society is completely collapsing around her, so you can imagine how difficult that is. But there's also a lot of violence and fighting as things crumble further and further. There's zombie elements to this, and it is a fantastic book. I also do think it suits being a standalone quite well, even though technically it is part of a trilogy, although the trilogy was never finished because Octavia sadly passed away before she could finish it. The second book in the series is called Parable of the Talents, which I have not yet read, but I'm looking forward to, and this is my first honorable mention. So yeah, I would highly recommend this one. Then we have a bit of a fun one, and that is A Series of Unfortunate Events, The Reptile Room by Lemony Snicket. I just thoroughly enjoyed reading this so much, and I had to highlight it because it is the best book, in my opinion, from the series. And yeah, I enjoyed it so much, and it was so much darker than I remembered, but is brilliant. I don't need to say much about Series of Unfortunate Events. We all know what it's about. And if you don't, go pick up the first one, Bad Beginning, and you're in for a treat. Then we have a poetry collection, which is titled Altered States, and it's edited by Sarah Shin and Ben Vickers. This is a beautiful collection. It's very lyrical in the way the poems are written, even though the poems are written by various authors. Some of them I was familiar with, some of them I wasn't, but it is a beautiful collection. It really brings in the elements of eco-conscientiousness and also this, again, this altered state of being, like what does it mean to be being, and how there's elements of symbiosis between humans and non-humans, and I absolutely adored this. It's also really interesting to see how words were manipulated on the page in relation to the poems. Like you had some really fun shaping going on, but you also have different kind of like just styles in terms of writing. So this is all bold and has like emojis and things, which I thought was really interesting, and I would highly recommend this for anybody who likes poetry. Then another honorable mention from the poetry theme is a poetry pamphlet, and it's titled 1,000 Miles from the Sea by Jane Byrne. I actually didn't include this in like my tracking of goals because it is maybe like 6 poems in here, but I thought this was brilliant. This is all about whaling, and you have different points of views, including a poem from the whales themselves, and you also have a poem in Scots, as whaling was very important historically within a lot of these coastal villages. So I thought this was brilliant, and I can't wait to read more from this poet in the future. The next one we have is The Word for World is Force by Ursula K. Le Guin. This won the Hugo Award. It is fantastic. It deals with such important topics around the horrible realities of Western capital extractivist societies and what that has done to other populations, and specifically the amount of effects that are already occurring in relation to those who have been oppressed. Specifically within the context of this book, it is Indigenous peoples, and then also noticing the development of retaliation because of that systemic violence and oppression that has continued throughout history. This is not a happy book, obviously with those themes, but also one of the most poignant aspects I think of this book really is the demonstration that violence changes an individual, a people, an entire society, humanity itself, once it has occurred, and it can never be erased or eradicated, and that it changes the way that generations then exist. There's a generational trauma to this violence that is very prominent within this story, and I just think it is absolutely brilliant, and more people should be reading it. Then another honorable mention is a debut from this year. It's titled Lost in the Garden by Adam S. Leslie. I loved this book. This was such a fun read. It's so bizarre. It is a very fever dream, overly heated, folkish, I don't know what I'm doing with my hand, but folkish story that is set within an English countryside, but there's also elements of like supernatural ghosts / zombies that are always present and can be mostly harmless, but also not, and be quite harmful and could end you essentially. But then there's this place, these characters, like, you're never supposed to go to it. You're never supposed to go there. Anybody who goes to Almonby never comes back, and then our characters are finding themselves going there. It's a story about friendship, it's a story about betrayal, it's a story about trying to figure out your place in life when there's no place for you. And yeah, I absolutely loved this, and I can't wait to see what the author brings out next. Then another honorable mention has to go to Julia Armfield's Private Rights. This is a climate fiction novel and is beautiful. I love Armfield's writing. It is creepy, but also it is a story about family, a story about family breaking apart, how there is a guilt surrounding being born into wealth when the world is crumbling around you, and also the guilt that these daughters have when their father has been an architect who has created homes for the wealthy, essentially to escape the consequences of their own actions in terms of climate change. At the beginning of this book, their father dies and they have to go into this home, and it's bringing these sisters back together, but also forcing them to face this man that they didn't want really anything to do with, while also the fact is like the world is falling apart around them. The city is completely flooded. That's what these homes did, where they would rise to match the sea level, so continuously being able to be above it rather than getting flooded. And so it's also really poignant in this book of how it's noted that these changes occur over time, gradually. It's not that one day they woke up and the entire city is completely flooded. Like, these things happen so incrementally that it then you wake up and you realize that this is like a new normal and it shouldn't be normal kind of situation. There's some supernatural elements in here too, and I just think that Armfield's imagination when it comes to storytelling is brilliant, and I absolutely love it. Can't get enough of it, and it's probably a potential thesis book as well, which is exciting. We have another poetry collection titled The Knot of My Tongue by Zahara Naqvi, and this is beautiful lyrically. It's written so amazing. It's just beautiful to read, and it's dealing a lot with thematics of diaspora and language specifically, and kind of like losing language, what that means, what that feels like, how it is to hold on to that language, etc. And I think it is a beautiful collection that more people should pick up. Lastly, we have a poetry collection that I actually purchased when I was in Nova Scotia, Halifax this summer, and it is titled Tender by Sylvia D. Hamilton. The author herself is from Nova Scotia, and so I wanted to pick up something that was from a local author, and this is what I chose. This is a collection that explores the experiences of Black people, especially of Black women, in their quest for self-determination and their desire to live full, complex, unencumbered lives. The poet is also a documentary filmmaker, and we have elements of that storytelling that come into play within these poems, and you also have visuals in terms of photography. Even the book itself, you have some of the photography that is featured. It's absolutely stunning. The thematics of diaspora obviously run throughout the entire text, and I think that this is absolutely just beautiful, and more people need to pick it up. And now finally, the moment you have all been waiting for, which is my top 5 reads for 2024. So this is in no particular order because I cannot order them. I think that they are all equally fantastic. But to start us off, I am going to note The Girl from the Other Side. This is translated from the Japanese. It is a manga series by Nagabi. Specifically, my favorite volume is in this edition here. It's a volume that explores, not much happens in that particular volume. I think it might be, I don't remember the exact volume, which is frustrating to me. But there's not much that happens. It's just exploring the relationship between teacher and Shiva. And I think it's so warm and cozy and uplifting and heartwarming. Not the entire series in of itself. It is very much a cozy read, but also it will break your heart, and it is emotional. It's dark, but again, there's hope in it. There's so much hope in it, and it's just a stunning series. But that particular volume, I remember just loving it so much because we did just get to spend time with these two characters and the development of this like familial relationship that they have with one another, and it was just absolutely beautiful, and that's why it's in my top 5. My next read for my top 5 in 2024 is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. This is an absolute masterpiece. I've never come across a book that has so perfectly merged sci-fi and fantasy. The world building is incredible. The themes that are discussed in terms of oppression, sexism, prejudices, colonialism, everything in here just packs such a huge punch, and it is so important in terms of what it does discuss, like the elements of diaspora, but then they have this magic system and this connection of how that relates to the person and the environment in and of itself, but then the relationships between the characters are so well developed, and the timeline of this book blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. But I don't want to spoil anything. I will just say that this is absolutely fantastic, and you need to pick it up because it is celebrated as it is for a reason. It's a masterpiece. Then the next book in my top 5 is The North Shore by Ben Tufnell. This is a book that not a lot of people have talked about. I've not seen anybody talk about it, to be perfectly honest, but I have talked about it a lot. This is a brilliant combination of literature and art. I've never come across a book that has so perfectly described paintings or sculptures that really bring that to life in word format. And the author of this was previously a curator at the Tate Britain, which I think really has helped in that regard. But it is weird, it is uncanny. There's a element of it which is a reimagining or retelling of Ovid, and there's, you know, bodily metamorphosis and change, and it's eco-gothic in terms of this symbiosis between being and non-being, or human and non-human, but also being and non-being, I suppose, in some strange capacities you could argue that. But I think that this is brilliant, and the writing is very lyrical and beautiful, and I have physically taken it upon myself to buy books and give this book to people to make them read it, because I think more people need to read this. This is a wonderful, wonderful achievement, and is one that I hope to return to. It's also got like sea coastal elements to it as well. Like at one point a character's coughing up seaweed. It's so bizarre, but in a really great way. And I think it would be perfect for this time of the year as well, 100%. So yeah, I hope that if I encourage you to pick up any book from this video, I would hope that it would be this one, just because I know that not a lot of people have heard about it, and I think that this deserves far more hype. Now we're down to my last two books for my top 5 of 2024, and the next one is Sophie's World by Justine Gardner. This is translated from the Norwegian, and it's incredible. It's been around for a very long time. My sister-in-law gifted this to me. This is very hard to describe because it is fiction, but like the story is fiction, but the philosophical schools of thought and the philosophers who are described in this is not fiction. But this is a really great way to learn about philosophy because it retains the dialectical, traditional, classical method of philosophy, and yet you're reading about it, but also the ending is so bizarre and weird, but it fits so perfectly because of everything that you have digested through the course of this book. And there's like an element of mystery in here as well to keep you on your toes, and I just thoroughly enjoyed this, and I think this is something that everybody should read because genuinely you will learn so much from this book. I would maybe say not if you're under 12, just because the ending does have some things that might not be totally age appropriate, but at the same time, this is just incredible. And as you can see, is very annotated. It's great to also discover philosophers who you might want to look into more. That was definitely one way that I was engaging with this text. But yeah, this is a very iconic text for a reason, and I completely get it now. And then the very last book in my top 5 for 2024 is none other than Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. If you've read Babel by R.F. Kuang, this is right up your street. It's not really shocking that this made my top 5 because Babel was like my top read of 2022. But this is also very unique in its own right. But it does have that same sort of element of like, if you do not take action, even if you mean well, it doesn't mean anything. And I think that that's really crucial in terms of the academic world, and especially with a lot of the themes that I deal with. I know that that is something that I have really taken to heart, and that really made me reflect quite a lot. But also just the characters in this are brilliant. The writing is stunning. And if you read Babel and didn't love the kind of like very long descriptions, or like I remember reading it and thinking like, oh, this feels like I'm in a lecture, but in a good way. I loved that. Whereas I know some people didn't love that. This doesn't have that element, but it does have the same thematics as Babel, if that makes sense, in terms of colonialism and violence against others and capitalist extractive measures, as well as impacts in relation to climate change and how there is this vicious cycle that continues to go around. And also, mainly, this really calls for the destruction of the patriarchy, which I appreciate. This is absolutely brilliant. Also, I was a little bit afraid at the beginning that, because I could tell what the magic system was getting at, but I was worried that it would only be, you know, revealed at the end of the book when it was very clear what was going on, at least to me. But it was revealed fairly early, so then I became really interested to see like how this was going to develop in terms of the characters and the narrative. I really love this book. It's just so poignant and makes you stare into uncomfortable truths. I think that's like the main thing about this book, that this was actually, it was self-published originally by the author, and then it was picked up for traditional publishing. I'm like, how did nobody immediately pick this up? This is such a brilliant book. There are some difficult points in this book too, so again, just a little nod to say, check the content and trigger warnings if you are worried. It is a heavy book. It is not a feel-good book. I will put it to you that way, but it is so important, and it's why I compare it a lot with Babel, because they definitely match in their approach to discussing these issues and the magic systems that are at play, even though they are very unique and are individual in and of their own rights. But yes, highly recommend this one if you haven't already picked it up. I will briefly mention that my goals for reading, sorry, I'm so tired because I filmed this for so long after my camera died on me, but my reading goal for 2025 is 50 books. I've brought it massively down this year because I'm going to be writing for the majority of the time, because I have like half of my thesis to write, and the books that I will be reading will be oriented around the thesis, so I just don't think I'll have as much time to read for pleasure. But if I hit that 50 marker earlier on in the year, then I'll bump it up to 75, and then if I hit that, then I'll bump it up to 100. But I'm just giving a good steady baseline of 50 books, which honestly, it's only been within the past 3 years anyways that I've been able to meet that, because prior to that it was about 40 books that I typically was able to read a year. So again, it's just keeping things into perspective and making a realistic goal for myself for what my year is going to look like. I would love it if in the comments you could share your reading goal for 2025 and also your top 3 to 5 books from 2024, because although I'm not going to have a lot of time to read for pleasure, I will always add to my TBR. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I hope you have a lovely time. Bye!